When I opened up the Netgear box, this is what I found. A prominent instruction card showed simple hookup diagrams which I used to connect the new router to one of my PCs. Most of it was perfectly obvious. Electrical power came into the box through a wall wart power supply in the usual way, and my PC's Ethernet cable came in through one of the 4 prominent Ethernet LAN connectors. I could have connected the Internet jack into my existing network infrastructure, but I suspected that would not be necessary, since I intended to bypass all of the routing functions anyway. I just left the WNR3500L's Internet jack empty. Now, I knew I would need to configure this device for compatibility with my network and the special situation I had in mind. Because I intended to bypass the router section and just continue using my existing router, I knew I'd need to disable some of its router-related services. Because I have a personalized LAN subnet using IP on my LAN, I knew I'd need to reconfigure the WNR3500L with an IP address from that customized subnet. Now, if the term subnet is unfamiliar to you, you really should watch our brief video clips on that subject before proceeding here. Those clips and other related helpful details are easy to find in our Advanced Networking section. Use the index along the left panel and click on Adding Managed Network Equipment to your LAN, where all these details are thoroughly explained. For the remainder of this article, we will assume that you have watched those video clips and that you are entirely familiar with the general principles involved whenever a new piece of managed network equipment is added to an existing LAN. Without that background, you won't understand what's coming next. Now, the box included a CD-ROM, and printed instructions urged me to insert that into my Windows-based PC and let it install proprietary management software for configuration. Ugh, I hate that. I was confident that this was a standards-based device, and that I could therefore configure everything I would need without any of their proprietary software. I decided to try it using just a standard browser and standard network device management principles as described in the aforementioned articles here at AskMisterWizard.com. Remember, if you need a review of that subject, browse into this area. On the back of the device, I found a tiny little label that included instructions for connecting my favorite web browser with the router's management interface for initial configuration. It said I should enter this URL into my web browser, www.routerlogin.net, with the username of admin and the password PASSWORD. I thought to myself, that looks like a DNS name, not a numeric IP address. I bet that router has a DHCP server in it and a little DNS service that'll translate that DNS name into an IP address that it will then use via DHCP to configure my computer's IP interface for compatibility. They're making a lot of assumptions here. I'll need to configure my computer for DHCP negotiation. Accordingly, I removed my computer's special static IP configuration, replacing it with the usual and customary automatic or DHCP configuration that's routinely used by 90% of the computers in small networks. This isn't something most people will need to do, but if your computer is set up to use a static IP address, then you'll need to do as I did, and you can learn everything you need to know about static IP addressing and DHCP configurations by watching movie clips in the Networking Fundamentals section here at AskMisterWizard.com. Use the subject index along the left panel and click on DHCP to see what I'm talking about. Get familiar with that stuff. With that DHCP change, my PC's internet setup was entirely generic, like most in homes and small offices. I rebooted the PC just for good measure, and with its Ethernet connector hooked up into one of the 4 LAN connectors on the new Netgear WNR3500L, I cycled its power on and off, just to make sure everything was stable. Then, I used Microsoft's Windows Explorer web browser to browse to the suggested URL, www.routerlogin.net, just like it says on the back of the box. Within a few seconds, I was pleased to see a demand for a username and a corresponding password. Referring to the instructions I'd seen printed on the back of the box, I entered admin and password as prompted. A router management screen appeared, filled with dozens of options for reconfiguration. I was communicating with the new box, and it looked like there were options for everything I was need. I was very pleased to observe that all of the basic networking functions and that had menus and prompts that were easy to find, and they behaved pretty much as I've come to expect. Everything was consistent with the treatment we'd given that subject in our advanced networking section under adding managed network equipment to your LAN. This was looking good. Within about 10 minutes, I had used all of those principles exactly as explained there to configure this little router for better compatibility with my intentions. I knew I was going to abuse this compared to their original design. First, I disabled all of the services that I knew might conflict with my existing LAN infrastructure. Because I wasn't going to use the device in the way the designers intended, I had to shut off several things. First to go was the DHCP service. It was easy to turn it off. Next, I tried to shut off the Wi-Fi radios. No need for them at this point. However, unfortunately, I couldn't find any option to completely shut the Wi-Fi radios down. Instead, I had to be content with switching them to a single out-of-the-way channel. I used channel 1, assigning an innocent-sounding SSID name, and configuring the strongest available security with an insanely long, impossible-to-remember encryption key. Nobody is ever going to use that Wi-Fi mode. I didn't configure the router's internet interface at all, since I don't intend ever to use it. After that, I set up the device's LAN interface for operation inside my own LAN IP subnet. In my case, I assigned IP address 192.168.10.200 to the device. Your situation and your IP subnet will probably be different. At the end of that process, exactly as I described in our referenced articles, I reconfigured my PC for use in my own 192.168.10.x subnet and reconfigured it into my LAN's infrastructure exactly as it had been prior to the arrival of the new router. I also connected one of the WNR3500L's LAN ports into my LAN infrastructure with a short Cat5 Ethernet cable and a handy Ethernet switch that was already on my network. Thereafter, I was immediately able to use my trusty browser in the usual way to browse into the box's management port from any of the PCs on my LAN. The device was now a passive member of my LAN infrastructure and IP subnet, not yet doing anything really useful, but responding sensibly to management queries and commands without conflicting with any of my pre-existing services.